Before we get started with today's podcast, we'd like to ask returning listeners to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you really enjoy it, share a link to this podcast with friends or family who would enjoy hearing our weekly discussions about basketball and basketball culture. Now, on to the show.
Again, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot, 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all theirs. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19.
Welcome to the 19-9 podcast. On today's episode, we're talking about the top 50 teams in NCAA history. This coincides with 19-9's Hardwood Heaven and SLAMs recent release of the amazing magazine about the top 50 teams. We're going to dig further into how the teams were selected and look at how SLAM laid out the magazine. But let's get to Josh right away, and we're going to start talking about the cover, because the cover has become something that is so critical to SLAM. Like, that's such a coveted piece of real estate. And I want to start there, Josh, just talking a little bit about how that all came together. You got it over your shoulder there, so it's nice that we can even see it.
You like that camera position?
Might have thought that out. Look at this. I even got a old SLAM over my shoulder for everybody.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Dug the shack on
yeah,
out.
the cover came together. The first part of the cover was SLAM had done the top 100 greatest college players of all time issue a little bit like 2 years ago. So it was kind of trying to differentiate between the two and how we could best do that. And it was actually PRC, Peter Robert Casey's idea to try to make it Salem style. So those of you that are 90s kids remember growing up in the 80s and 90s with Salem t-shirts that did the character shirts and all of that of Larry Bird and Jordan and all of that, and making this more cartoonish but with a Salem feel to it. And so then it became like, who do we want to pick? Who belongs on the cover? Sprinkling in some of the greatest women players to go along with that, which would have been dope. My argument was for coaches and stuff too. So like the original concept was to just blow it out and have hundreds of these players and coaches.
Like a Where's Waldo?
Exactly. Yeah. And then, like, I was gonna see if the artist could like squeeze my face in between two people or something and just see if people caught it. But we were gonna have like a chair being thrown through the air, the Payheed Kansas banner up in there, some of the Tark obviously chewing on the towel, John Thompson with the towel over his shoulder. Coach K, Fab Five huddled together in that famous iconic pic of them huddled together. You know, that was like the real brainstorm of it. And then it became a budget thing of, if you have 100 people on that cover, you also have to pay the artist to draw 100 people and all that stuff too. And then like we originally wanted a fold out cover too. So I
was going to ask you about that. That sounds like a huge like poster that I could hang somewhere that I'd be able to look through.
You know how much I like posters. So obviously we wanted to like fold that cover out and then make it like bigger and longer and include all things college basketball, mascots and everything. But the way that it turned out was super dope and we're really happy with it.
So how did you go about selecting the artist? Because I know there was, I at least heard of like a part of the talk about that, like the style. What style did you have those t-shirts growing up, or who had the idea to do the caricatures instead? Because when you did the top 50, or when SLAM did the top 50 players of all time, they used pretty, photorealistic or kind of maybe a filtered picture for them. So why the cartoons instead?
Yeah, that was PRC's idea again. He was the one that kind of came up with it, and then we all kind of riffed on it and started going. And then editor at SLAM, chief editor at SLAM, Adam Figman, great dude, by the way. Shout out to Adam. He was like, let me track down some of Salem's old people to see if we can get the ball rolling. Nice. And maybe we can get actually somebody from Salem to do it. I wasn't a part of that process, obviously. I was just on the emails that were going back and forth keeping us up to date on who said yes and who said no to actually drawing it. And they eventually settled with somebody who was or not settled for. They got somebody who was a part of Salem, like younger growing up, I believe, that ended up
That's
coming
cool.
through and doing the cover work and stuff.
I hope it ends up on a T-shirt. I got the 5-star on right now. I'd love to. I know Slam does a lot of the covers on there. I think that one makes a perfect one to just wear around and to talk about. Speaking of talking,
that's been talks in the back channel. A lot of licensing on that shirt.
Yeah, I
A
bet.
lot of licensing.
I bet. Jordan alone.
Yeah, that's a nightmare to go to not. Now, I mean, DTG, you could print them and sell them out the back door.
Yeah, I already have that one. I just don't have that on there.
Yeah, from a licensing standpoint, it's gonna be pretty tough.
I love it. Okay, so let's get into the top 50 here. I got to ask you first, like, where did you start on this? Like, because we've watched some old games now and they're not all readily available, and you're pulling from teams that are not just like the last 20 years or 30. You're going back to like the 50s, 60s, stuff where they might not even have a TV recording of it anywhere.
Yeah, I think that we made a decision without saying we made a decision to kind of start around 59, 60, I think. So I think we cut out the 40s teams. And it was definitely like mid 50s, maybe 57 Kansas or Carolina or somebody like that gets on there. And then your San Francisco teams are some of the earliest teams that are on there too. But you have to make you have to make that concession a little bit just because of lack of resources out there. And then the people that are compiling the list weren't even alive. Right. So as far as like where did the list started, the list started with Gary Barnett, my dad. He's the one that put together the original list. And I've told this on the pod with him before, but he brought down a binder. He researched the shit for like 3 months and then brought down a binder of every team that was ranked. And then like he went and compared his list to ESPN rankings and wrote down all the rankings that ESPN had. And then there was another ranking that another group had, and he had those. So you could compare his list to where ESPN ranked him to where another outlet ranked him. And then he had a page for every single team that he wrote that had stats and had breakdowns of games and important moments in their title runs and things like that. So I gave it back to him because he needed to study for the pod that I did with him over this. But I will keep that and keep that for all time because it was hilarious when he delivered it down here. And we were all kind of laughing like, Dad, it would have been really nice if you would have put this on a computer where I could just copy and paste.
No, you can't. You're not scanning that.
Little dad move, man.
Not Control F to find information in there. You have to actually read it.
Yeah, exactly. That's old school, man.
I listened to that podcast, and in my question, I put, "Did you look through some microfiche?" But I'm almost guaranteeing that he went to a library and was like scanning some microfiche or something like that.
Big library guy. Lots of library cards he has for the city around here. Yes, he is a library man.
Okay, so the answer then, did you consult with anyone on your list, is obviously yes. But are you talking to anybody else when you're coming up with this? And then where did you start? So you got this binder from him, but how do you start compiling your list? Because I'm sure he has ideas or maybe even ranked them himself. But, you got to put it through your lens too, just what you've seen in basketball, what you know about basketball kind of now. And you almost have to think like going forward, when you put something like this out into the world, you want it to not be like, oh, it's going to change next year. It's kind of like the GOAT debate. Like, Jordan, you could maybe start to argue about LeBron. But, I mean, if you're staying Jordan, it's going to take a long time before anybody's like, that's a silly answer,
Yeah, probably every 10 to 15 years you could do a revamp of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we took his list. The one thing with my dad's list was he only ranked national champions because that was the criteria that I gave him. And then as we talked with Dennis Page and PRC at SLAM, we figured and we wanted to open it up to everybody because there were some great teams that didn't win a national championship. And so it was very hard to leave to come out with the top 50 teams of all time and not have at least one Pi Slamma Jamma team on there, or not have UNLV 91, who I think is shit ton better than UNLV 90, not on the list, one or the other. So like, how do you rank 90, but not rank 91, even though 90 is the one that won the national championship, but they lost like 7 games that year, whereas the 91 team was dominant through the whole year, and then slipped up against Duke and lost in a heartbreaker, a tight game, a 1-point game, 2-point game, whatever it was. And then, then you look at that team that they lost to in Duke, and they're in like the top 10 of the greatest teams of all time. When they came back in 92 and they were all a year older. So like, it wasn't that they got upset by a George Mason run type team. They got beat by one of the greatest teams, eventually one of the greatest teams of all time. So we had to start sprinkling back in Georgetown 85, UNLV 91. And that got really tricky too, because then again, Georgetown's before, but we all agreed that they were better in 85. So we ranked the 85 team and not the 84 team.
I think that's actually interesting. So that's a different take on the list. Yeah, it was a different take on the list. I think that really makes it more dynamic.
Yeah, and you almost have to say it in the writing. You almost have to say this is almost like a double entry to an extent, and then like Pi Slamma Jamma maybe has one of the best dynasties of college basketball history if they're able to win 2 of the 3 that they get to, and they lose them. You know what I mean? And so it's like, well, do you leave them completely off the list because they weren't able to win the final game of each of those seasons? They need to be recognized. So it came down to how great were these teams as a whole, and not putting an emphasis on them winning the national championship, but at the same time also putting an emphasis on the teams that won a national championship. So I couldn't rank any team that didn't win a national championship inside my top 10. My dad didn't have them ranked anywhere because that wasn't the criteria I gave him. And then we had to have DP come up with his list and PRC come up with his list, and then we just blended them all together on a spreadsheet to see where the averages kind of shook out to.
I love it. So with that in mind, what was the toughest call? Was it number 1? Because I know who your number 1 is. I've got a little behind the scenes of this spreadsheet. But I was just kind of curious where your toughest picks were. Like, that seems like maybe that was a no-brainer for you. But maybe not. I don't know. What was your toughest pick?
The toughest picks are definitely not anywhere in the top 25, probably, I don't think, because you can sit there and argue the little details of that all day. You just take you take the average of what they were ranked by the 3 of us, and the chips fall where they may on that, and everybody gets the respect. I think from 26 to 50 is where it gets really dicey. And especially when you're trying to rank the last 4 teams, and then you start to realize some of the teams that you left off and where they rank. And so what we did was we created a top 50 plus another 14 that were ranked at the end of it, so we could put together a bracket that SB Nation's going to be rolling out at some point. Maybe they already have. I haven't seen it yet, but they might be rolling it out for the Final Four or something like that. So yeah, I mean, that's where it gets really, really dicey. And then you have the slam factor too. So, Slam is in the business of selling magazines. So there's going to be some rankings that are put in there. There's going to be some teams that are put in there maybe a little bit higher than they should have, or maybe plugged in there because it's the Slam generation teams, and we love those teams. That's me too. And we love those teams so much it was hard to not include them,
So maybe it was wise to have Gary doing some rankings for you, but I'm curious, when you were coming up with your list, then how much did style of play factor in? Because it is like that's such that weird thing. Like, if I watch, the classic is like I watch a Bob Cousy video, and I'm like, hold on, that guy couldn't dribble with both hands. How am I going to rank him in the top 50 players of all time? It doesn't seem right. But everyone is bound to their era, and they were dealing with the circumstances that were in front of them. So you also can't discount those teams. So I'm just curious how you dealt with that kind of never ending wormhole of a problem.
You cannot compare eras, period. Like, it's impossible. You just can't do it. So you have to look at the teams and how dominant they were in their era. If 1957 North Carolina went 33-0 and beat everybody in their time frame by 25 points, I just made all that up, but for analogy's sake, then you know that they were dominant for their time. They beat everybody that was in front of them. It's not their fault that they were born in college age in 1957, where the game had only evolved to a certain point. And it's not to say that those teams wouldn't be great if they were developed in this era too. It's just you just can't do that. So you really have to look at the year that they had that you're looking at and ranking them. How dominant they were up against what they were, and then you just have to take it. You have to take it out of, okay, well, let's put them up against 1976 Indiana. Well, 1976 Indiana is probably going to beat the shit out of them, but like, you know what I mean? That doesn't matter because they were dominant for their time. So it's really, really, really hard. You could take anybody from this modern era and put them back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're going to win a lot of games just because the game has evolved so much. But you have to set that aside. I think that conversation and that debate is completely different animal than what this top 50 magazine was.
Okay, so you have that, but then how much do you put coaches into it? Because again, this is that other part of it where you can and you can't see it on the floor, right? Obviously, the best teams ever have like Wooden, Knight, Dean's, all these great coaches. But are you factoring that in when you're ranking your teams? Like, okay, if this UCLA team was going against this NC State team, I think the advantage goes to Wooden. Or did you even like get that deep into it?
I didn't really get that deep into it because the coaches shined on how many teams they had that were up for discussion. So you have Bob Knight, and he has 3 teams up for discussion. You have Roy Williams in his 4, 3, 4, whatever it is. And you have obviously UCLA is the hardest one because there's 10 of them. And trying to rank like, okay, was this Lou Alcindor team, UCLA team, better than the Lou Alcindor team the next year, who also went undefeated and beat the shit out of everybody. And you have to like, you can't have a top 10 that's just all UCLA teams. Even if you believe that to be true, it just is not good for print mag and for talking back and forth. I do think the place where coaches come into play is in the bracket. I think that's really fun, and I think we're going to do some more pods with the bracket and breaking down the matchups of the all-time bracket too, that SB Nation's going to do. And I think that's where it's really fun, where you're like, okay, I don't know how to compare these two teams, but I'm going to give the edge to Bob Knight over X coach, or I'm going to give the nod here to Jim Valvano or Coach K, or whoever the case may be that you're going up against. You're going to say that's when you can really get in the weeds and get into the X's and O's of it and say, like, I like this coach. The talent's about equal, but I like this coach a little bit better.
I love that. There was one, I don't remember who it was, but flipping through, there was one on the girls' top 50s that someone just put UConn every time. And not that it's a wrong.
Oh yeah.
Not that it's even a wrong answer, but it's just like you said, it's a little anticlimactic if you just put all UCLA, just chalk.
Yeah,
UCLA.
That was funny. It was a lot of fun looking at the guest pickers.
Yep.
So Slam did a bunch of guest pickers where they came in and ranked their top 10s. And I wish that we could have all been a part of conversations with them too.
I know.
Because a lot of people rank like 90. The thing I was using earlier, they ranked 90 UNLV, but not 91 UNLV. And it's that being skewed off of that national championship blowout. And so like, it's just funny how that whole thing kind of plays out. But it was a lot of fun looking at at the guest pickers and who they were taking and stuff, because I compared that to our list too to see if we were off anywhere and if we missed, because you can miss anywhere outside of the top 25 and you're okay with that because people have their opinions and stuff, but the top 10 has to be pretty tight. Like the top 10 has to be pretty well known. And so as I was comparing our list up against the guest pickers list, I felt pretty good about where we shook out.
Yeah, they had some heavy hitters that they brought in too for those rankings. That's neat to be able to get those guys, because they, a lot of them like Gottlieb are living and breathing it every day and just have been in it for a long time. Billis is in there, so I think that's pretty great to see that.
Gottlieb actually forgot to do it.
Did he? Never mind. Then when he comes on here, we're gonna have to get his top 10. That's right. I think you told me that. That's why he's stuck in my head. So
right.
We talked about that.
We'll try to get him on the pod so he can give us his top 10.
That's great. That's great. Okay. So I had a question kind of outside of basketball. Did any of that factor in? Because it's, again, a weird thing, but these teams are so iconic that they do end up making a cultural impact as well. You talk about UNLV or the Fab Five. They end up going beyond basketball. So I was curious if that any of that came into your thinking when it comes to these teams, or how you would factor that in, because when you're thinking about the Hall of Fame or anything, part of what matters, like Michael Jordan, is like cultural impact, and you can't measure it on the court, but if you're going to have a list that lasts, you have to have some of that factored in there somehow.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about that. It was really hard to take that out of the rankings completely. They did put an insert in that was called One Shining Moment, and it was just kind of like iconic moments in NCAA history, which captures some of that. So Texas Western, which is UTEP now, winning in 66. All black starting five and that type of stuff, and Fab Five and the Leitner shot, and just certain moments of that was put in there. But I was really happy with where some of those teams were ranked too, and how much of that was just like sentimental and knowing that there was a changing of the guard, or that they changed the game, or they had a cultural influence on the game that went way beyond like what they did on the hardwood, even though some of those teams won it all. It's impossible to say that it didn't have an effect, but I love that they weren't placed in there just based off of that, because we had another section that we could acknowledge those teams in. So wherever those teams were that were ranked in there is because they deserved it, not that we were trying to get in there from a cultural perspective of we need to throw this in because it was a great story. We already had a spot for that. So nice. Where they fell in the rankings is where we felt like they deserved to be.
That's almost another list is what your kind of stance would be.
Yeah, to an extent, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go on to the last question here. This one I love, of course, because we're talking Hardwood Heaven and basketball utopias as part of what 19.9 is doing to tie into all of this. And the question for you to start out would be, which one of these teams would you want to be a part of or on for their run to the championship, or if they fall short even, which team would you want to be a part of?
I'm gonna go off the script because this team was not ranked. They made a Cinderella run to the tourney. But if I'm going to Hardwood Heaven and I'm a part of any team, I want to be a part of the 1983 NC State Wolfpack team because I want to be around Jim Valvano.
Okay. I love that. Such a character. Definitely.
I'll throw it back to you. What's yours? Who do you pick?
I'm going chalk on this. I'm going with 76 IU, or actually I might go with Isaiah. I could go with that. Either of those IU teams. I want to see what Knight was really like, day to day, and just to be a part of the last undefeated team. All that's wrapped up in that would be so cool. coming off I'd love to have been on the team the year before too and fallen short. So you get that kind of extension into the next year, the redemption part of it. So that's my basketball utopia.
You're going with the general. You're going through a year's worth of practices with the general, and I'm gonna go hang out with Jimmy.
I'm definitely gonna regret it by mid season. After the season, I'm great, but mid season, I just watched that Last Chance U, and all those guys were like, "Man, I just want out of here," because that coach is so tough, and I can imagine so many of those guys at the end of that night season would be like, "Oh man, I'm ready for summer break." But if it ends in a championship with an undefeated season, I mean, you just get to be a part of something for forever. I mean, we're still talking about it now, and I just think that would be such a unique opportunity to be able to tell those stories from a first person point of view.
Absolutely. Last unbeaten, at least for another couple weeks.
I know. I picked the Zags at the beginning of the season, hoping that they would lose one game, but I think it's going to happen, man. You better look out.
Yep. Before we get off, I want to talk about two omissions that I had. So the one is Patrick Ewing on the cover.
What happened
back,
there?
I wish we would have found space for Pat Ewing on the cover, because he was just a dominant force, and Georgetown had a hell of a run. If we weren't going to get John Thompson or coaches on there, we probably should have Pat Ewing in there somewhere. And then number two is 2009 UNC. I would have had them somewhere towards the end, 45 to 50. They were better than a few of those teams that we put on there, and I know that we've gotten called out on that one before. And that's just
Who did you like on that team?
They didn't make it, man. They just didn't make it, and I don't know why they didn't make it. Other than some other teams got slotted in there, but at bare minimum, they should have been in the last 14, in to round out the bracket too, and that was just an omission by me. So I apologize, UNC fans, but you got plenty of teams on the list.
Yeah, I was gonna say they'll cry out all the way to their 19 Final Fours or whatever they got, national championships.
They got a lot.
They'll be all right. I'm pretty sure. All right, man. You got anything else?
That's it, man.
I'm gonna get
Hardwood Heaven. Go check it out.
Get us out of here. Thank you for listening to the 19-9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. 5 stars like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 19-9's social media so you never miss a release. Until next time.